I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is the December 2nd, 2014 Elections and Rules Committee. My name is Jacob Fry, and I'm the chair of this committee, and I'm joined by several council members, Palmisano, Johnson, Goodman, Quincy Yang, Glidden, Bender, and Kano. We have a quorum of this committee. On our agenda today is simply one item, which is to go over several minor revisions to our rules. And you should have a bunch of packets in front of you that summarize. And here to present is our clerk, Mr. Carl. Mr. Carl.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Casey Carl. I have the privilege of serving as city clerk. And as indicated, I'm here to present the draft 2015 revision of the council's rules of order. There are essentially three amendments that are included in the revision. The first two of these are largely housekeeping issues and help to clean up our existing rules. The first of these has to deal with the cancellation of meetings, which was not previously addressed. Under Rule 3, Section 6, that's found on page 3, we've added language to address the cancellation or rescheduling of regular meetings of the City Council when and if necessary. Similar language was also added under Rule 6, Section 1 for the cancellation or rescheduling of regular meetings of the standing committees. And I should note, copies of the draft amendments are online and have been distributed with the agenda, and those changes are shown in bold red text. The second administrative change has to do with the standard order of business for regular meetings of the City Council. That's found under Rule 3, which is Section 8 on page 3. The order of business is used to structure agenda items for presentation to the City Council. As you know, the Clerks Office is in the process of implementing an electronic legislative information management system. As part of the transition to that new system, we need to adjust the order of business to provide definite agenda sections under which business can be added. And to accomplish this, staff proposes to create a new order titled Call to Order, under which the preliminary matters of attendance, agenda adoption, acceptance of minutes, and the referral of petitions and communications would be addressed. We also propose to add a new order titled Introduction and Referral Calendar to accommodate the introduction, first reading, and referral of ordinances. Under the current process, notices of proposed ordinances are given in one cycle under the order of new business and then are brought forward in the next cycle under unfinished business. But this really isn't unfinished business. Unfinished business refers to matters that are taken up in one session and left unfinished when that session ends. Adding the introduction and referral calendar creates an appropriate section on the agenda for the handling of ordinance introductions. Also, with our new legislative system, it will be better able to track when ordinances are introduced throughout the year from one year to the next. So this change recognizes the legislative process as it exists with respect to the treatment of ordinances, as opposed to lumping those in with business that truly is unfinished from a previous meeting. And those are the two administrative amendments that are included in this revision. There is a third amendment, which is more substantive in nature, that's been added as a new Section 7 under Rule 9, which is shown on page 11. This new rule addresses the automatic expiration of ordinances and other matters at the conclusion of a four-year council term. Members will recall that we took similar action during this year's organizational meeting in which various ordinances that had been previously introduced without further action were terminated. Some of those ordinances had been in the system for more than 5 years. So adding this rule makes that a standard practice at the beginning of each new four-year term of the City Council as a way of automatically refreshing the system. And that completes my summary of the proposed rules revision, Mr. Chair. A resolution was drafted that would approve the 2015 rules revision and designate it as the official rules of order. The draft resolution is included in your briefing materials, and I'm happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. Are there any questions for our city clerk? I'm not using speaker management right now, so Councilmember Quincy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for bringing these forward. They're in some parts very small and technical, but sometimes more substantive, but it really reflects a significant evolution to these rules. We recall maybe last term spending a lot of time with you as I was the chair of this committee, and you remember what we did from the drastic rewrite that made this the document it is. So thank you for your staff work on presenting these. I did have a question on the new Section 7. What happens, or maybe you could address this, as if the subject matter was introduced, ordinance was introduced by a council member who is no longer serving in the next term, how does that get resolved or left undone?
Mr. Chair, the question of what happens to matters that are introduced at the conclusion or during one term and carried over where the council member that's the author is no longer a member would be similar to what happened this year. Members of the council who are seated during the organizational meeting could take on sponsorship of those ordinances, and they could be re-referred back to the appropriate standing committees, or they could expire without that kind of action. So matters that were not then claimed or sponsored by a current sitting member of the council would expire automatically. Those that were taken up as sponsored by a new member of council or a returning member of council would be then re-referred to the appropriate standing committee. To that point, you may recall that this year we also made some changes to our committee structure. So by allowing us to take those matters up and re-refer them to the appropriate committee, it might have been in one committee that then has evolved to a different committee, and so it would allow the council to make those determinations.
Very good. Thank you.
And to add on briefly, this has stemmed from apparently a history of at times council members right before they leave office proposing a bunch of stuff that's then it's undecided whether or not it's carried through. So it's a question of whether to sort of keep it in this in-between land that staff don't know what to do with, or to get rid of it. So thank you, Mr. Carl. Any further questions? Seeing none, I'll move adoption of the 2015 revised rules of order as presented. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. That motion passes. The ayes have it, and that item will be forwarded for consideration by the full council. Mr. Carl, I understand before we finish up that there's one more item that you wanted to discuss.
Mr. Chair, with the committee's indulgence, I wanted to share some good news about work that's underway in the clerk's office that sets the stage for next year. And to make some introductions. As you know, the Clerk's Office was fortunate to recruit Josh Schaefer, who's here with us today, to the position of the City Records Manager. He's been with the department for about 3 months and has already made significant and positive impact both in our department and across the enterprise. During the past 3 months, Mr. Schaefer has engaged partners in the City Attorney's Office and our Information Technology Department to respond to legislative changes this past session to the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act related to data security policies. Under the new law, the city must develop policies for collecting, identifying, and ensuring the security of data, as well as procedures for identifying and reporting any security breaches. In addition to working with internal partners, Josh is also collaborating with the state's Information Policy Analysis Division at the Department of Administration and other cities across the state on model policies and procedures. And speaking of data practices, just yesterday, the Ways and Means Committee recommended approval of a 5-year contract with Municipal Code Corporation for codification and related professional services. As part of that contract authorization, I'm very pleased to report that the city will be acquiring a new system created by Municode called Just FOIA. It provides a single platform to receive, refer, track, and report all data practices requests and related issues across all departments. Mr. Schaefer and Grant Johnson, our department's IT administrator, have worked with a cross-departmental team that included representatives from the City Attorney's Office and from 311, IT, Police, CPED, and Regulatory Services on this acquisition. Josh also will be convening a meeting for department-based records managers as well as 311 liaisons to better delineate what are data practice requests as well as what are simple information requests, so that in the future we can better distinguish as an enterprise what are truly data practice requests and subject to the state law versus what are simple information requests. Beginning next year, we'll be rolling out training for all department-based records managers and data practice liaisons to include issues on the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act, records and information management policies here at the city, as well as industry best practices. We're also looking to create a shared internal website that will provide resources, tips, and checklists for our department-based workers on information management issues. And that kind of training, which has not been offered before, will be critical to enterprise initiatives such as the new open data portal and to ensuring that the city is properly managing its information assets throughout their identified life cycles. As an initial step, Josh surveyed all department-based records managers to establish a baseline of current knowledge and skills about these issues, and that baseline will allow us to develop metrics and track the results of our future training issues. Mr. Schaefer also has established a partnership with the Library and Information Science program at St. Catherine University to address the city's historical archive collection. Working with the university, we've created an internship opportunity to complete an assessment of the city's archival collections and to develop recommendations on how best to manage those historical assets. The internship provides a capstone project for students in Library and Information Science, and our long-term goal is to develop future practicum opportunities for these students that also benefit the city. In related work, Mr. Schaefer has partnered with the Central Library on a digital preservation grant project to identify, assess, preserve, digitize, and provide access to historic image collections that were provided by our CPED department. This project is a multi-agency collaboration that includes the City of Minneapolis, the Hennepin County Central Library, the Minnesota Digital Library, and the Hennepin History Museum. The Clerk's Office also recently completed a project with the University of Minnesota's Borchert Map Library to digitize the city's historic collection of aerial photographs. This covered more than 6 decades of the city's growth and development. All of those photos were scanned and cataloged, and the originals have been transferred from the city to the Borchert Map Library for permanent preservation. Digital images of all of those aerial photographs have been provided to the city and will be uploaded to the city's new open data portal and also have application for use with the city's new enterprise land management system. Clerk's Office also recently initiated a partnership with Hennepin History Museum to provide historical displays at City Hall documenting the history of the city and its growth since incorporation in 1867. And we hope that this partnership and others like it will continue to enhance existing civic education activities that engage residents. Mr. Schaefer also has been extraordinarily busy in his brief time with the Clerk's Office, and some of these efforts, as I mentioned, carry forward into 2015, such as streamlining our citywide retention schedules and making these easier to apply and use in our departments. We also look forward to partnering with IT on system acquisitions and technology projects to ensure proper data security, access, and related protocols in enterprise operations. And finally, we anticipate collaborating with departments to establish a centralized scanning and imaging operation in our Document Solutions Center to provide in-house support for enterprise operating needs. The other half of the hat I wanted to report on to you briefly was our Elections and Voter Services Unit. As you know, we have much to do in 2015, and although there are no regular elections programmed for next year, and we very, very much want to avoid any special elections, it doesn't mean that our elections team won't be busy. Among other work that must be completed, the Elections and Voter Services team will convene a ranked choice ballot design work group to evaluate layout, formatting, and print options for RCV ballots that will enable us to expand the number of choices in each race beyond the minimum of 3 that are required under the existing ordinance. And while we were pleased with the administration of the 2013 municipal election, we're cognizant that improvements are still needed. Largely, these focus on the design of the ballot and how it can be better used to accommodate more choices in each race. We've already initiated conversations with our vendor, ES&S, and will include our partners from Hennepin County. In addition, we look forward to bringing amendments to the RCV ordinance next year, previously discussed as part of our debrief with this committee, all aimed at streamlining the tabulation processes, which would also include the ability to allow for batch elimination of candidates. We'd like to complete the ballot design work and test the results by mid-year so that we complete that entire scope of work before we need to turn our attention to planning for the 2016 presidential election. Similarly, we are very much in need of acquiring a new elections management system to replace our current system. We're hopeful that we can identify a market solution that will accommodate our current operating needs as well as future needs that we project. Most importantly, better help for managing the city's largest workforce of 2,500 plus election judges, seasonal staffers, and temporary workers. We also hope to complete that business needs analysis and put out an RFP by mid-year next year, which will give us ample time to acquire, test, and implement that new system before the presidential election. Speaking of which, we do plan to spend a good portion of next year recruiting new election judges in preparation for the presidential election. This will include recruiting bilingual and multilingual judges who can provide translation support in the polls for voters who require that assistance. And we look forward to working with this committee and with the mayor next year on identifying new polling places and potentially additional precincts to better serve our voters. As you know, we recently increased the number of precincts from 117 to 125. However, as we plan for turnout in 2016, we believe additional precincts may be necessary, along with some changes or improvements in actual polling places in order to avoid a repeat of 2012, when some of our voters experienced very long lines and in some cases, waits that exceeded 3 hours. In keeping with the recommendations from the Presidential Commission on Elections this year, we're hopeful that we can partner with the Minneapolis Public Schools to use more schools as polling places, both in 2016 and in future years. As the Presidential Commission identified, schools make terrific polling places. They're usually well known within the community, they have sufficient parking, and are ADA compliant, and they have the space necessary to set up and operate a successful poll. So I think that's a win-win proposition, a win for the city and a win for the schools to have voters in the schools on Election Day. Nationally, the Presidential Commission recommended that Election Day be reserved for Teacher in-Service Day, and it's an idea that I think we should explore with our public school district. Speaking of the school district, our 4-year term with them for the administration of elections expires, and so next year we'll also need to be working on a new contract with the school district for the next 4-year period of elections. And of course, we will continue to build on and enhance our outreach and engagement efforts. In particular, we're excited about connecting with communities and populations that have historically been underrepresented to emphasize the importance and participation of voting, and explain how they can engage, get information, and participate. This includes outreach to youth, new citizens, and other first-time voters, university and college students who are new to Minneapolis, seniors and those who support them in long-term care facilities, the homeless and those who are in transition, and other demographics that must be included in the broader spectrum of the community. That work in educating and engaging our residents will be important as we look to make improvements in recruitment and retention of election judges, as well as improving and streamlining our own operations. And all of these issues that I've identified, in addition to our normal day-to-day work, will require the attention of the Clerk's Office in 2015. I wanted to highlight these important projects and thank the Council for its continued support of our work. Though largely behind the scenes, the things that we do in the Clerk's Office are critical to a well-managed city that serves all residents and contributes to a quality of life that distinguishes Minneapolis as a premier community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. Clearly, you have quite a few very exciting projects that are in the pipeline right now. Do we have any questions for Ms. Carl based on the comments he just made? Seeing none, Mr. Carl, thank you so much to you and your staff. You're doing a tremendous job. Thank you to your efforts on Election Day. They are meaningful. And as we have no further business, we are adjourned.